The intimate, devastating line that finally reduced Princess Catherine to tears was just laid open inside a locked parlour at Windsor Castle. What hurts the most is not simply what Camilla said in secret. It is how long those cruel words were allowed to circulate while everyone smiled at Catherine in public. She stood right next to her. She grinned for the cameras. She nodded with warm affection. Yet all the while, she was quietly dismantling Catherine's future behind her back. When Princess Anne repeated that exact comment in front of the family, William froze. His posture went completely rigid. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, and her hand moved straight to her mouth in utter shock. But Anne was not finished. She had brought a file of facts into that room, and the words she read next were so deeply personal that William immediately demanded to know how long the palace had been hiding the truth. You see, the treachery here was not that Camilla held a personal dislike. It was the calculated duplicity. It was pretending to protect Catherine's fragile health while actively weaponizing her recovery against her. When Catherine walked into that Windsor parlour, she believed they were meeting to discuss royal obligations, public schedules, and upcoming appearances. Instead, Anne closed the dossier in front of her, looked Catherine dead in the eye, and admitted there was a betrayal she could no longer conceal. If this unexpected revelation shakes you, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now so you never miss the deep truth behind these hidden palace doors. Hi viewers, do you think Camilla was wrong to speak behind Catherine's back like this? Leave a simple yes or no in the comments below right now. What unfolded in that room was not typical family friction. It was an institutional ambush. According to those who know the exact details of that confrontation, Camilla had spent months questioning Catherine's fundamental strength in private. She did not just question her timetable or her workload. She claimed that Catherine was simply too weak to handle the weight of standing beside William. Then came an even sharper cut. Camilla claimed that public sympathy had elevated Catherine above the crown itself. At first, Catherine said nothing. She just sat there. Think about what she has given to this institution. She raised 3 children under a relentless microscope. She carried massive public expectations for over a decade. She spent years preparing to stand at the very head of the monarchy. Yet the words that broke her composure did not come from an aggressive press or a hostile crowd. They came from inside her own family circle. William turned to Anne with a single urgent question. Had Camilla said these things once in a moment of frustration, or had this been going on for months? Anne's answer was immediate. There was a pattern. That single answer changed everything. Staff members had been hearing variations of the exact same message for weeks. Catherine was becoming too powerful. Her immense popularity had to be controlled. Her public involvement could not be allowed to overshadow the current reign. While some minor comments might have been brushed aside as mere office friction, what Anne laid on the table could not be ignored. She unclasped a pale blue leather dossier marked WM 2024 and placed the briefing papers directly on the wood. The strategy had not remained in the background. Conversations about rebalancing public attention had already altered Catherine's reality. Her speaking time at major events had been abruptly cut short. Her position in official photo setups had been moved down the line. Details of her public engagements were altered hours before departure without any valid explanation. Catherine had agreed to every single modification. Why? Because she truly believed those choices were made for logistical balance and her own health. She trusted them. Every single concession she made was actually part of a larger plan to contain her reach. Camilla tried to interject. She claimed her genuine worry for Catherine's health had been twisted into something ugly. But she did not speak out forcefully. Anne reminded the room that she had already given Camilla a private, stern warning to stop making insulting remarks. That warning had been completely ignored. King Charles sat in total shock. He had heard general discussions about workload and balance, but he had never heard the harsh language Anne was presenting. William's anger surged. Someone was altering decisions, manipulating schedules, and concealing the worst comments from the sovereign. Then, Anne disclosed the phrase that had deeply disturbed the household staff. Camilla had stated that Catherine would eventually have to be replaced. Catherine looked down at her hands. Her health was no longer the issue. This was about power, control, and the deep fear that the future queen was becoming far stronger than anyone had anticipated. Anne had one final revelation to deliver. Diana's name had been brought into the private discussions. It raised a chilling question. Did Catherine's public affection actually belong to her, or was she merely living in the lingering memory of a woman the world had loved decades ago? Anne had hesitated before bringing that detail into the room. She knew how deeply it would wound. Catherine felt the blow coming before the sentence was even finished. William moved his chair closer to his wife. Camilla stared directly at Anne. Charles remained entirely silent. Catherine realized the cruelest truth had finally come to light, and despite her best efforts, the tears began to fall. The tension building toward this moment had started months earlier, right when Catherine began her gradual return to public duty. The palace could neither predict nor control the overwhelming tide of affection that greeted her return. People lined up for hours just to see her wave. Families brought their children to touch her hand. By sunset, every gesture was making global headlines. She had not asked for that level of attention. It happened naturally because the public watched her face, a deeply personal struggle with incredible grace, protecting her children while striving for normalcy. It felt personal to people. It was not staged. It was not a publicity stunt. It was authentic. That authenticity gave her something the palace administration could never calculate or manufacture. It gave her genuine trust. Most of the family welcomed that warmth. Charles was proud of the public support. William stood proudly beside her. And in front of the cameras, Camilla smiled right along with them. But behind those polished press photos, dark questions were being asked in private rooms. Why were Catherine's appearances completely dominating the media landscape? Why was coverage of the current reign dipping whenever she stepped out? Why did a single simple gesture from Catherine elicit more genuine emotion than an entire week of formal state announcements? No one voiced jealousy out loud. They did not have to. Their actions spoke for them. The initial changes were small enough to seem accidental. At one reception, Catherine's prepared speech was suddenly trimmed down. At another event, her assigned spot next to the king was quietly shifted further down the line. In internal memos, the title of future queen was subtly replaced with broader administrative phrasing. Her team was told the language was updated for institutional consistency. Catherine accepted it without hesitation. That acceptance made it easy for the pattern to continue. When event schedules arrived late, she did not complain. When photo arrangements placed her away from the center, she complied. She assumed the administrative staff was simply managing pressure during a chaotic transition. She had no idea that someone was watching every single move. Princess Anne had navigated palace mechanics for over 50 years. She knew the difference between administrative error and deliberate containment. She noticed when household staff began treating Catherine with sudden caution. She noticed when senior secretaries stopped replying directly to queries from the Wales household. Above all, she noticed the exact same phrase appearing in separate, unrelated offices, public compassion. Anne first heard those words from an assistant during a quiet afternoon. The staff member spoke carefully, revealing that Camilla had expressed concern that public sympathy for Catherine was distorting the proper balance inside the monarchy. Anne asked if the remark was made in anger. The assistant replied that it was spoken calmly, as if stating an obvious administrative fact. A few days later, another staff member reported a separate conversation. The tone this time was far sharper. The insider recalled Camilla, stating that the public had begun to view Catherine as the emotional core of the royal family, making her popularity dangerous to the establishment. Once again, Anne asked if the comment related to Catherine's health or recovery. Once again, the answer was no. It was entirely about influence. Anne did not act impulsively. She knew how easily words get twisted as they pass through palace corridors. A simple sentence can be softened or sharpened depending on who is repeating it. So, she waited, she observed, she compared what she was hearing against Catherine's actual daily schedule. Then a third account surfaced. Direct instructions had been issued to rebalance public attention. A senior assistant involved in event preparation confirmed that staff were told Catherine should not always be placed in the spotlight. Her public remarks should be kept brief, and references to the future of the monarchy should be minimized. Camilla's name was not written on those directives, but the phrasing matched her private remarks perfectly. That was the exact moment Anne stopped treating this as harmless palace gossip. Gossip disappears into thin air. This was leaving a clear paper trail. Someone was not merely reacting to Catherine's public appeal. Someone was actively trying to contain it. And through it all, Catherine remained completely unaware. She continued showing up prepared, treating the staff with warmth, and standing beside Camilla with the exact same respect she had always shown. That contrast would later become the most heartbreaking aspect of the entire ordeal. While questions were being raised behind her back about her strength and her future, Catherine was publicly demonstrating total loyalty to the crown. Anne knew she had to make a move. If she spoke too early, the palace would dismiss everything as a simple misunderstanding. If she waited too long, private resentment would solidify into official policy. Then she found the blue briefing document. Buried beneath bureaucratic language about balance and continuity was an explicit proposal to reduce Catherine's ceremonial profile at upcoming state events. And right at the bottom of the page were 4 words that confirmed her worst fears: control the sympathies of the public. Anne read the line twice, closed the folder, and prepared to expose the truth. The paper trail did not begin with an angry confrontation. It began 6 months earlier with a single routine file update inside the Lord Chamberlain's office. On March 12th at 9 a.m., a document titled The Public Appearance and Ceremonial Balance Review was generated. On its surface, the memo appeared entirely harmless. It spoke of managing sovereign workloads, ensuring balanced media coverage, and protecting senior royals during periods of personal health recovery. It was standard institutional language, bureaucratic, neutral, completely unsuspicious. Catherine received the revised itinerary at her home in Windsor. The briefing note explained that her speaking engagement at the upcoming Early Childhood Foundation Summit needed to be shortened. Her keynote address was cut down from 15 minutes to 7. The reason given was simple: venue time restrictions and scheduling conflicts across multiple households. She did not question the decision. She raised 3 children while carrying immense public expectations, and she trusted the administrative team. She assumed the palace was simply shielding her from unnecessary exhaustion. 2 weeks later, another change occurred. At a high-profile state reception, The ceremonial positioning map was altered. The traditional layout placed Catherine directly adjacent to the monarch during formal receiving lines. But when the updated floor plan arrived from the Central Secretariat, her mark had been shifted 2 steps back. The official explanation was an update to diplomatic protocol guidelines. Catherine accepted it without a second thought. She took her mark, smiled for the cameras, and performed her duties with the exact same grace she had displayed for over a decade. When an engagement schedule arrived hours late, she did not complain. When a photo setup positioned her further away from William, she complied. Every single modification seemed small, reasonable, and entirely explainable on its own. But behind those subtle adjustments, a systematic operation was unfolding. The media logs from that quarter revealed a stark reality. Despite her reduced speaking time, Catherine's brief appearance at the Early Childhood Summit generated 4 times the global press coverage of the main sovereign address. Her photos dominated the front pages. Her name trended across every major news network. To the public, it was an inspiring display of quiet resilience. To the institutional inner circle, it was an alarming disruption of traditional authority. Power within an ancient monarchy relies on a strictly maintained hierarchy. When the popularity of the heir's household eclipses the presence of the current reign, tension becomes inevitable. Someone decided that the balance had to be forcefully restored. The containment was intentionally designed to look like routine management. If Catherine's team raised an objection, the administrative staff could point to her health recovery as a reasonable justification. If the press noticed her reduced role, the palace could claim they were protecting her from stress. It was a brilliant strategy. It created absolute deniable leverage. Then came the moment the quiet strategy began to slip. During a private lunch between senior household staffers, an assistant made a casual remark regarding Catherine's media presence. The assistant noted that Catherine's public appearances were officially flagged in internal memos as a distorting operational variable. The phrasing was unusual. It did not sound like standard logistical management. It sounded like containment. Princess Anne happened to hear about the remark through a trusted contact inside the Secretariat. Having spent decades navigating the inner workings of the institution, Anne understood how paperwork can be manipulated to carry out hidden agendas. She knew that true institutional decisions rarely happen during loud public disputes. They happen quietly, on paper, through subtle changes to daily protocol. Anne began monitoring the administrative records. She cross-referenced the modified event schedules against the private meeting logs of the Queen Consort's private office. A clear, disturbing pattern emerged. Every time Catherine's public reception reached a new peak, a new administrative memo followed shortly after. A speech was trimmed, an appearance was rescheduled, a ceremonial role was quietly scaled back. Anne traced 3 separate schedule modifications directly to internal directives issued by the Central Secretariat. None of those directives bore Catherine's input. None of them had been sent to Prince William for approval. The final piece of evidence surfaced during an autumn planning session for an upcoming state visit. A draft itinerary arrived from the Secretariat, specifying that Catherine should not stand directly adjacent to the monarch during televised arrivals. When Anne inquired about the origin of the instruction, the secretarial staff claimed it was an unapproved draft. But Anne checked the origin stamp on the document. The instruction had not come from a junior logistics officer. It had come directly from the Queen Consort's private office. The containment was no longer a theory. It was an active, documented campaign happening behind closed doors. Gossip vanishes into thin air. Paperwork leaves evidence. Princess Anne knew that if she was going to address the subtle sabotage happening inside the palace, she needed absolute proof that could not be brushed aside as a simple misunderstanding. She began her investigation off the record, meeting quietly with senior household aides who had witnessed the internal shifts firsthand. The first conversation took place in a quiet office near the royal archives. A senior assistant recalled a private gathering where Queen Camilla openly discussed Catherine's public standing. Camilla had not raised concerns about Catherine's health or her recovery timeline. Instead, her language was sharp and dismissive. Camilla remarked that Catherine was simply too brittle to handle the mounting pressure of her future role, suggesting that her quiet demeanor was a sign of fundamental weakness rather than restraint. The assistant noted that the comment was delivered calmly, without any trace of anger, as if stating an established institutional fact. A few days later, Anne conducted a second interview with a staff member responsible for public event coordination. This individual revealed an even more unsettling exchange. During an event briefing, Camilla had explicitly argued that public sympathy was elevating Catherine above the traditional structure of the crown itself. Camilla claimed that the public had begun to treat Catherine as the emotional center of the royal family, making her soaring popularity dangerous to the stability of the current reign. The motive was now crystal clear. This was not about workload management or protecting a recovering family member. It was about authority, visibility, and deep institutional insecurity. Anne decided to act before the private rhetoric solidified into permanent policy. She requested a brief, closed-door meeting with Camilla following a routine autumn planning committee session. When the administrative staff cleared the room, Anne brought up the issue directly. She did not accuse Camilla of personal jealousy. She kept her tone remarkably calm, measured, and firm. She asked if Camilla had made statements suggesting that Catherine was too fragile for her public duties. Camilla did not deny the remarks. Instead, she reframed them, arguing that someone within the institution had to take a realistic view of the situation. She claimed that public emotion could not be allowed to dictate constitutional hierarchy, and that maintaining institutional authority required tough, uncomfortable boundaries. The room grew tense. Anne looked directly at Camilla and delivered a stern, uncompromising warning. You will not use her health as proof of weakness, and you will not weaponize Diana's memory as a weapon. Camilla bristled at the confrontation. She accused Anne of letting personal affection cloud her institutional judgment, warning her that Catherine's popularity was creating expectations that the monarchy could not safely fulfill. The warning should have ended the matter. It did not. Instead of backing down, the containment effort accelerated. A double standard became blatantly obvious within the household operations. While other royal schedules were actively expanded to build public engagement, Catherine's official appearances were systematically restricted, despite massive public demand across the globe. Then came the tipping point. Just 2 days after the private confrontation, a household aide overheard Camilla speaking to a senior secretary in a secluded hallway near the private apartments. The conversation centered on the upcoming transition of power and the future structure of the royal households. Camilla made a statement that shocked the aide to the core. She stated that Catherine's public standing was built on borrowed time and inherited sentiment. She claimed that Catherine was not building her own legacy, but was merely living in the shadow of Diana's memory. And then came the final, devastating sentence that would shatter all remaining trust. Camilla declared that once the political structure of the monarchy transitioned, Catherine's public role would have to be strictly regulated, because ultimately, she would have to be replaced. The statement was not a casual remark. It was an outright challenge to the line of succession and the future of the Wales household. Anne received the report of the conversation that very evening. She realized that private interventions had failed. Direct warnings had been completely ignored. The attempt to diminish Catherine was actively progressing from behind-the-scenes administrative maneuvering into a direct assault on her personal standing and legacy. Anne reached for the blue leather dossier on her desk. She gathered the modified itineraries, the altered ceremonial layouts, the media audit logs, and the exact transcripts of the recorded private statements. She scheduled an urgent private meeting for 10:15 a.m. the following morning at Windsor Castle. She requested the presence of King Charles, Prince William, Princess Catherine, and Queen Camilla. The time for quiet observation had officially run out. The confrontation that would expose the hidden rift inside the royal family was about to begin. The door closed. October 14th, 10:15 a.m. The parlor inside Windsor Castle fell dead silent. 5 people sat around the polished oak table, but the atmosphere felt like an interrogation room. I sat near the back, watching the tension build. Princess Anne did not offer a polite greeting. She did not pour tea. She simply reached into her coat, pulled out the blue leather folder marked WM TEF 2024, and laid it flat against the dark wood. She looked straight at King Charles. Then she turned her gaze toward Queen Camilla. Anne unclasped the binder. She took out a single sheet of paper containing the exact transcript of the private remarks, cross-referenced with 6 months of altered itineraries and modified event schedules. She began to read. She read the dates. She read the specific timestamps. She named the household aides who had been instructed to shorten Catherine's speeches and move her positioning away from the sovereign. William sat frozen. His arms were crossed tightly against his chest. His face turned pale, then flushed with a quiet, dangerous rage. He looked at the document, then slowly turned his head to look directly at Camilla. Charles looked bewildered. He admitted he had signed off on schedule adjustments, but insisted he was told those changes were designed for workload balance and Catherine's health recovery. He had never seen the administrative directive to manage and control public sympathy. He had never been told about the comments made behind closed doors. Camilla tried to interject. She maintained a calm, steady posture, holding her hands tightly over her notebook. She argued that planning documents were being misinterpreted as personal attacks. She insisted that every royal household must balance public visibility, and that no single individual's popularity could be allowed to overshadow the constitutional hierarchy of the crown. William leaned forward over the table. His voice dropped to a low, lethal whisper. He asked who gave the order to describe his wife as brittle. He asked who authorized the statement that Catherine was too weak to handle her future role. Camilla did not answer directly. She stated that tough discussions about public expectations were necessary for the survival of the institution. That was when Anne delivered the final, devastating blow. She turned directly to Catherine. She revealed that the private campaign went far beyond administrative control. She read the recorded quote from the hallway conversation. She repeated the exact words Camilla had spoken to senior secretarial staff, that Catherine's public standing was merely unearned nostalgia, that she was living in the shadow of Princess Diana's memory, and that eventually, when the monarchy transitioned, Catherine would have to be replaced. The statement hit the room like a physical shockwave. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. For 9 months she had endured public scrutiny, medical recovery, and relentless rumor cycles with complete composure. But hearing those words, spoken by someone sitting across the table who had smiled beside her in public, shattered her emotional defense. Her eyes filled with tears. Her hand moved quickly up to cover her mouth, trying desperately to hold back a sob. A single tear spilled over her cheek, followed by another. William instantly shifted his chair closer to his wife. He reached out, his hand grasping hers tightly under the table. His eyes never left Camilla. He demanded to know the exact date, time, and context of every single meeting where his wife's replacement had been discussed. He stated firmly that if the palace apparatus was being used to undermine Catherine, all joint household cooperation would cease immediately. Camilla tried to defend the statement as a constitutional observation about long-term public perception, but the room was no longer listening to explanations. Catherine wiped her face with a tissue. She took a deep, controlled breath. She lowered her hand from her mouth and raised her head, looking directly across the table at Camilla. Her voice was trembling, but her words were remarkably clear. She asked how many staff members had heard those comments while working alongside her. She asked how long people had carried those whispers while she smiled and performed her duties without complaint. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time that morning, the power dynamic in the room inverted. Catherine was no longer the targeted victim. She was the future queen consort, demanding accountability from the institution she had served with unwavering loyalty. The administrative resolution came without dramatic speeches. King Charles acted with swift, quiet authority. He reached across the table, took the blue folder, and closed it permanently. He issued an immediate executive order rescinding every directive contained within the WM 2024 dossier. He mandated that moving forward, no schedule changes, ceremonial positioning shifts, or public media guidelines regarding the Wales household could be implemented without the direct written consent of Prince William and Princess Catherine. The senior secretary who had executed the containment directives was quietly reassigned to administrative duties outside the capital. The confrontation ended, but the fundamental damage was done. In the weeks that followed, the public saw what appeared to be a unified royal family. At the very next state function, Catherine stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, dressed in an elegant dark coat, smiling warmly at the thousands of supporters gathered below. Camilla stood just a few feet away, maintaining standard protocol positioning. To the millions watching the television broadcast around the world, the family appeared completely harmonious. But behind the heavy glass doors of the palace, the reality was entirely different. The formal communication channels between the two private offices were permanently severed. Personal notes were replaced by strict, official administrative memos. Joint public appearances were quietly scrubbed from the long-term autumn calendar. Catherine had reclaimed her standing, her authority, and her public autonomy. She had proven that her strength was not fragile, and that her connection to the public was built on genuine resilience rather than borrowed memory. The paperwork was settled, the directives were destroyed, but in the long, quiet corridors of Windsor Castle, an unbridgeable divide had been permanently established. Yet, as the dust settled on the Windsor Castle confrontation, an even more alarming discovery was uncovered deep within the royal archives. While reviewing the historical correspondence linked to the WM 2024 dossier, investigators stumbled upon a second restricted file marked with a red seal, a file that proves this entire campaign was not an isolated incident, but the continuation of a secret protocol drafted over 30 years ago. In our next video, we expose the sealed 1995 letter signed by a senior courtier that names the exact royal figure designated to step into Catherine's role if the unthinkable ever happened, and the chilling reason why that letter was suddenly moved to a private vault just 4 days ago. You cannot afford to miss what comes next.